Oh man, what was I talking about again? Oh yeah, Star Trek's animated debut! Alright, let's go!
Das Zuber Space Blog, Stardate, March 19, 2023. We start this story off in space? Well, obviously, right? Oh, and by the way, we're at red alert! The Enterprise is being pulled towards some sort of planetoid made from a dead star. Mr. Spock figures they're being hurled that way because of the dead star's hypergravity. And they're totally going to slam into this planetoid. Man, like the engines don't even do anything to stop this gravitational pull. But luckily, thanks to Mr. Sulu's fancy driving, he just casually puts the ship into orbit of this thing, right? Which I'm still not sure how they did that. Going at that velocity, it seems like no matter what they were gonna do, man, like boom, right into the rock, right? But hey, oh well, I don't really care because the crew is safe, yay!
Suddenly,
Uhura is picking up more radio signals, and it's coming from this massive thing in space. Space travel aficionado Dr. McCoy recognizes that this thing is a starship, which Spock confirms, and also confirms that this ship is dead, basically, right? There's no life forms on board, there's heavy damage to the ship, and the readings show that this thing has been in orbit of this dead star for 300 million years. Like, that's crazy! So Captain Kirk, Mr. Spock, Dr. McCoy, and Mr. Scott grab their force field generating life support belts and beam on over to the ancient ship, which is a fantastic ship, man. Like, holy jeez, right? This ship is made of organic materials by the look of it, and it's stronger than any metal we have currently in the Federation. They also notice that every single pod has been destroyed from within. But why? To find the answers to that, they break and enter deeper into the ship until they get to what seems to be the main control room, and it's still amazing that there is some form of power left to the ship in there. So as Kirk and crew get trapped in this room, there is a recording of some ancient alien playing, presumably the captain of this old ship, and I'm not sure how he did it, but Mr. Spock was able to have this recording translated into English. But the recording was a warning! A malevolent creature boarded the ship and the crew destroyed the ship, hoping it would also destroy this creature. But I guess not, man, because this ship starts blowing up real good like around the away team.
luckily,
Lieutenant Kyle beams the away team back on board the Enterprise, you know, before any real danger happened. So all should be good, right?
wrong.
Some crazy ass thing beamed on board with them. And it's fairly gaseous, man, so it seeps right into the Enterprise. This is not good, man, because this thing is starting to wreak havoc. Life support failures all over the Enterprise, the ship's phasers destroyed the alien ship, and the computer is going haywire. Like, aye! The alien possesses the ship and demands that Kirk and his crew get the ship free from the dead star's gravity, and is starting to attack anyone who disobeys. Huh, but like, if this thing is in control of the Enterprise and has access to all the ship's files, like, couldn't it figure out how to get out of the gravity well by itself? You'd think? Is it stupid? Huh, it boggles the mind, right? But speaking of minds, Mr. Spock mentally calculates the calculations of the calculatory way of using the slingshot effect to get the Enterprise out of the dead star's gravity. He can't do it on the computer because obviously the creature would know what's going on, right? The rest of the plan is to make it seem like the ship is flying towards the dead star going to crash. This should freak the creature out and it'll leave the ship, and then blip, the Enterprise can fly right out of there, and this plan goes to plan perfectly. The creature jumps ship to the dead star and is trapped there. It's like literally crying and begging not to be left alone because it's so lonely after all these millennia. But the Enterprise, man, they just turn the ship around and take off. Gone. They don't need to hang out with no alien. They got better things to do, man, like star charting. Hooray! And with that, that is the end of this,
Logical tale.
That was an awesome episode, eh? Man, I've been watching Star Trek since I was like knee-high, man, and I gots to tell you, like, this animated series beauty. Of course, when I was younger, I watched the original series in syndication and the Next Generation when it first kind of came out, so I was like, yeah, all over the Star Trek. I don't incredibly recall watching the animated series, but I did watch it when I was an adult, man, and I was still kind of blown away about how awesomely Trekky the show still is. For the animated series, you could easily fall into that mental trap thinking, you know, like, oh, well, it's a show for kids, they're really gonna dumb it down, and it's gonna be kind of a cheesy kind of a show. But no, this show was still total Star Trek, man. Like, it was not dumbed down or anything, you know, it might have been written to be a bit more digestible for a younger audience, but still, man, this show was totally Trek. They still had all the science and science intrigue and scientific investigations, all the explorations, all the theoretical possibilities of a wide variety of things. You know, it is kind of a debate if this show is actually considered canon or not, you know, part of the factual Star Trek universe or not. According to the show's creator, Gene Roddenberry, it was not indeed canon, no! It's just a fun little Star Trek stories which are really neat and cool. But according to everybody else who worked on the show, they were all like, yeah man, we wrote the show and made the show as if it was season 4 and season 5 of the original Star Trek series. They wrote it as if it was canon, so they believe it is, so therefore I kind of do. Some things yes, some things no, right? For example, having that force field, you know, life support belt, which is kind of just like a force field around them, is that really, you know, canon? You could pass that off as like, oh yeah, that's just technology that they kind of had around for a short time, you know, in that time frame of the show, and they never used it again, you know, like that does happen a lot. But at the same time, they made those life belts with just a glow around the characters, you know, because it was so much easier to animate and cheaper to do. Realistically, they all would have been in spacesuits, right? So you'd have to have more animation cells created, you know, for a short period of time, and it would have taken more time and more money, and they were like, you know what, no, we'll just make some glowing lines around them. Boom. Science. We can get into it later, but man, you know, I kind of dig that it is kind of canon, realistically. Because I just like that kind of stuff. The wonderful thing about hand-drawn and hand-painted animation is the mistakes that you do see in it, right?
For example, Exhibit A with Captain Kirk's leg painted yellow like his uniform. I don't know what's going on.
Or Exhibit B where Mr. Scott is a floating torso.
What do you mean we forgot to add his legs?
One question I do kind of have with this episode is that creature really a malevolent jerk, or is it, you know, just kind of misunderstood? We only figure that it's malevolent because that ancient alien told us. But like, what if the creature is like, you know, like totally lost and it's totally freaking out? It just wants to get back home, but it doesn't know how, and it figures the only way to do that is with a starship, right? It's just scared and desperate. Usually in Star Trek, you know, they will try to communicate with a creature like this, you know, which didn't really happen in this animated episode. That was the only kind of hiccup, but other than that, still a great episode, right? One thing I love about Star Trek is the small details. And a small detail that I really did love to see in this was Lieutenant Kyle. In Star Trek, there are always those tertiary characters that you see hither and thither, right? Maybe for one episode here, one episode there. Lieutenant Kyle showed up in 10 episodes for the original series, if you can believe it. He was Mr. Scott's right-hand man in engineering. So to see him make it in this episode, man, it's like, dude, man. So speaking of this animated episode and the original live-action episodes, like, you could have made this animated episode into live action, right? Like, realistically. But would it have looked as cool? Sure, you could have had, you know, the model for that alien ship still being really big and all that, but the scenes with the away team really would not have looked as grandiose and as spectacular, right? And that's kind of the thing with animation that you could do, which is totally awesome. You know, having completely different looking aliens, completely different looking ships, completely different looking anything, man. That is one of the best things about this episode and this series, man, is that what they could actually do. Like, it's truly what the imagination for science fiction is. And it's beautiful.
There's more to discuss.
So yeah, Star Trek, eh? Wagon Train in the Stars. You know, that live-action show that almost got cancelled after season 2, got renewed for a 3rd season, but then was cancelled for realsies after season 3. Yeah man, that show. But, you know, shortly after it was cancelled, NBC realized that they really shot themselves in the foot. Star Trek became a cult classic in syndication, and interest in the show was just expanding. Like, people were having Star Trek conventions and fan clubs, for a show that was in reruns. So the network was like, holy crap, man, we gotta get Star Trek back on the air. But how? All the original sets, from the show were destroyed. Who knows where all the ship models wound up? And if they wanted to build everything from scratch, man, that would be like really expensive, right? So they're like, geez, what do we do, eh? Enter Filmation Studios. So Lou Scheimer at Filmation always wanted to do a Star Trek cartoon. Even back in the late 60s, when the original Star Trek show was, in its original run, he did pitch a cartoon spin-off. The premise of the spin-off show was to have the original series crew train a younger teenage crew of space explorers who themselves were on a ship called Excalibur. It was kind of more for the kids, like learning about space and stuff like that, right? But that show never happened. But at least Filmation had their foot in the door with that. So if we fast forward to 1973, Filmation and Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry went to NBC Studios to pitch their new show, and boom! They got it! Filmation's idea for this new show was still focused on a younger cast of characters. Basically, what they wanted to do was have a younger version of the original Enterprise crew while they were at Starfleet Academy. But for some zany reason, Mr. Scott would still be an adult with a mustache and would be basically the teacher. Although I guess the mustache was quite the prophecy, so good on you, Lou. But to that idea, Gene Roddenberry was like, no. Star Trek is Star Trek. It's gonna be the same crew on the same Enterprise. They will still be exploring strange new worlds, seeking out new life and new civilizations. We're not gonna do anything different than we've done with the original show. End of story. And so to that, Filmation said, okay. So now that that is settled, it's time to really rebuild the show. So Gene Roddenberry got the original script editor from the original series, Dorothy Catherine Fontana, aka DC Fontana, to be the story editor and associate producer for this new cartoon show. And then boom, with her on board, Star Trek is back, baby! And she had some tricks up her sleeve. Well, not really, just some kind of wonderful happenstance, I guess. The Writers Guild of America, for Hollywood and all that, they were actually on strike during this time. But the strike that they were on was only focused towards live action, so therefore, animated shows were still like free game, right? That had nothing to do with the strike, so DC Fontana went to all the writers there who wrote on the previous Star Trek show and said, hey you guys, why don't you come over here? I got some work for you if you want, and you'll be back in the final frontier. So pretty much every writer came back, right? Like, you actually got Star Trek-y Star Trek going on, so that's awesome. And all the actors came back as well, right? Well, a couple of hiccups. Originally, Nichelle Nichols and George Takei were not originally cast as their animated characters of Uhura and Sulu, respectively. And once Leonard Nimoy heard that news, he was like, you know what, screw that noise. If you don't get them on board, I will not do the voice of Spock. And you can't have Star Trek without Spock. No, no. Nichelle and George were hired, and we still had Leonard Nimoy there, so it's all good. The only person who wasn't hired was Walter Koenig, who played Mr. Chekhov, and in fact, his character of Chekhov wasn't on the show either. Budgetary reasons and all that kind of stuff. So the ship needed a new navigator, so they created a new one, Mr.Arex. And he did indeed make his worldwide debut in this featured episode. But like I was saying earlier, one of the great things about animation, man, is you can really have wild and wacky characters, much like this Idosian, who has 3 arms and 3 legs, a completely different shaped head and everything, right? It really showcases the aliens that are in the universe, and for an organization like the Federation of Planets, you can really start to focus, yeah man, we are all part of this big federation, look at all these aliens we have on board. Even though for this episode, Mr. Arex, didn't have any lines or anything, and you kind of see seen him briefly, but still like a really interesting character and like a real standout character for this animated series. And from there, the sky is the limit. There are a lot of things to talk about this show, but you know, for the meat and potatoes of the, you know, foundations of the show and whatnot to this first episode, that's kind of the long and skinny of it all, right? So, yeah, I guess, you know, with this, that, those, and all those other things there, I guess, that's that! Right on, and there you go. So, thanks for watching the video. I hope you liked it as much as I did making it. Also, feel free to check out the source material that I featured in this video. And if you want to leave a comment on anything you may have liked or things I might have missed in this, you know, feel free to do so. Or anything else, you know, just to say hi. That's cool too. And other than that, you know, have a great day. Thanks.